Some men build empires to conquer the world. Others build them simply to watch a single person burn. There is a specific, agonizing flavor to betrayal that rewires the human brain. It takes the soft, trusting parts of a soul and calcifies them into something cold, sharp, and infinitely patient. When the woman you swore to protect looks at you with absolute disgust, packs her bags, and abandons her child for a digital fantasy, you do not just move on. You wait, you sharpen your teeth. You dig a pit so deep and line it with so much gold that she cannot help but throw herself inside. The scent of cheap, boiling pasta used to define Arthur's evenings. It was the aroma of survival, a modest life shared in a cramped two-bedroom apartment where the heating pipes rattled like dry bones. Clara, his college sweetheart, had once looked at him as if he hung the moon. But that was before the pregnancy, before the vows exchanged in a dusty courthouse, and long before the suffocating weight of utility bills crushed the romance out of their shared air. While Arthur bled himself dry working double shifts at a logistics firm, Clara remained anchored to the frayed living room sofa, her face bathed in the sterile blue glow of her smartphone. Her world had shrunk to a 6-inch screen, a digital ecosystem where women she barely knew flaunted designer handbags, exotic vacations, and husbands who bought them diamonds on a Tuesday. The algorithm fed her resentment. Toxic comment sections and boastful forums became her gospel. She began to view Arthur not as a partner, but as a warden keeping her from her rightful destiny. Her descent was gradual, then sudden. First, it was the vanished savings, $3,000 swallowed by a supposed online crypto guru who promised her financial independence. When Arthur discovered the missing funds, Clara didn't apologize. She screamed that he was holding her back, that his lack of ambition was a rot infecting her youth. Then came the late-night texting, the secretive smiles directed at a screen, the sudden obsession with her appearance. She had found a man in a luxury car enthusiast group, a man who promised her the Maldives and matching Rolexes. The day she left tasted like metallic ash in Arthur's mouth. Rain lashed against the bedroom window as she shoved cashmere sweaters, bought with credit cards they couldn't afford, into a sleek suitcase. Arthur stood in the doorway, cradling their 2-year-old son, Oliver. The boy was whimpering, sensing the tectonic plates of his universe snapping apart. Arthur begged. He stripped away every ounce of his pride, pleading with her to remember the late-night conversations in their dorm, the promises they made. Clara merely adjusted her designer sunglasses, her expression devoid of warmth. She looked at him the way one looks at a stained piece of furniture left on a curb. She walked out the door, climbed into a waiting silver Mercedes, and drove out of his life, leaving behind a silence so absolute it threatened to deafen him. That silence became Arthur's anvil. He did not drown himself in alcohol. He did not seek therapy. He handed Oliver to his mother for a week, locked himself in the apartment, and let the weak, forgiving version of himself wither away. When he emerged, he was unrecognizable. He quit his dead-end logistics job. Armed with a desperate intellect and a meager loan patched together from sympathetic relatives, he launched his own supply chain consultancy. The next 3 years were a blur of caffeine, bloodshot eyes, and ruthless negotiation. Arthur slept on office floors. He outmaneuvered competitors with a cold, detached precision. Every time exhaustion threatened to buckle his knees, he visualized the taillights of that silver Mercedes. It was a dark, consuming fuel. His business exploded, scaling rapidly across state lines. The cramped apartment was traded for a sprawling, glass-fronted house in the hills, and then a second property downtown. He traded his scuffed boots for bench-made Italian leather, his rusted sedan for a midnight black Audi. Yet his personal life remained a barren tundra. Women noticed him, drawn to the quiet danger humming beneath his tailored suits, but he remained utterly untouchable. He wasn't saving himself. He was setting a stage. The universe, Arthur knew, had a twisted sense of humor, but it rewarded patience. The opportunity materialized on a crisp Tuesday afternoon outside Oliver's upscale kindergarten. Arthur stood leaning against the polished hood of his Audi, checking an email on his phone. A familiar yet drastically weathered voice called out a name he hadn't heard spoken with that inflection in years. Clara stood on the sidewalk. The 3 years had not been kind. The arrogant glow of her perceived luxury had vanished, replaced by a hollow, brittle exhaustion. Her clothes were cheap, ill-fitting, and devoid of the designer labels she had once worshipped. Faint, yellowish bruises shadowed her collarbone. The millionaire she had left Arthur for had turned out to be a violent fraud, a man whose wealth was a house of cards that collapsed into a 5-year prison sentence for domestic battery and embezzlement. Clara's eyes darted from Arthur's bespoke charcoal suit to the gleaming rings on the Audi's grille. The calculation in her gaze was instantaneous, followed immediately by a well-practiced welling of tears. She stumbled forward, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch his sleeve. Arthur did not flinch, nor did he pull away. He allowed the contact, feeling nothing but a glacial calm. She wept. She poured out a frantic, disjointed apology right there on the pavement. She spoke of how foolish she had been, how the online world had poisoned her mind, how she had realized every single day that Arthur was her true soulmate. She dropped to her knees, clutching his hand, entirely oblivious to the stares of other parents. She begged for a second chance, her voice cracking, pleading to be a mother to Oliver again, to rebuild the family she had shattered. Arthur looked down at her. He studied the pathetic curve of her spine, the desperate grip of her fingers. A slow, gentle smile spread across his face, though his eyes remained as hard as obsidian. He knelt beside her, reaching out to tuck a stray strand of dull blonde hair behind her ear. His voice was a soothing baritone, dripping with simulated warmth. He told her he understood. He told her he had never stopped waiting. He spun a lie so beautiful, so meticulously crafted, that she swallowed it whole. He said he wanted to erase the past, to give her the wedding they never could afford the first time around. He instructed her to go back to her parents' house in her hometown to rest, to heal. He promised to handle everything. 20 days, he said. In 20 days, she was to return in the finest white dress she could find, and they would exchange vows in the grandest venue the city had to offer. Clara's face illuminated with a frantic, euphoric relief. She kissed his hands, praising his forgiving soul, entirely blind to the steel trap snapping shut around her ankle. For 20 days, Clara lived in a state of manic triumph. She returned to her hometown, parading her impending redemption before her parents, who had watched her spectacular failure with silent shame. She maxed out a newly acquired, high-interest credit card on a lavish silk and lace gown. She posted cryptic, victorious messages on her social media, teasing a miraculous comeback. She was going to be the wealthy, adored wife she always believed she was destined to be. The 20th day arrived, bathed in golden afternoon sunlight. The venue Arthur had selected was a sprawling, historic botanical garden, enclosed by towering glass domes and overflowing with exotic orchids. Clara arrived in a rented limousine, her parents in tow, beaming with restored pride. She stepped out, adjusting her veil, the heavy silk of her dress whispering against the cobblestones. She felt like royalty. She glided toward the entrance of the main glass conservatory. The heavy mahogany doors were propped open. Inside, a string quartet played a delicate melody. Rows of impeccably dressed guests sat in gilded chairs. But as Clara stepped over the threshold, her triumphant smile froze, then fractured. At the end of the aisle, standing beneath an archway of white roses, was Arthur. He looked magnificent, powerful, entirely in his element. But he was not looking at the doors. He was looking at the woman standing directly in front of him. A woman in a breathtaking, minimalist white gown, her dark hair cascading down her back. Arthur was holding her hands, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Clara's mother gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. Clara's legs turned to lead. She stood paralyzed at the back of the room, a ghost invading a living world as the officiant's voice echoed through the glass dome. She watched, suffocating on her own breath, as Arthur slipped a platinum band onto the other woman's finger. He leaned in, kissing his new bride with a genuine, grounding passion that Clara had not felt in years. The applause broke the spell. As the guests stood to cheer, Arthur turned. His eyes scanned the crowd, drifting over the smiling faces of his colleagues, his friends, his family, until they locked onto the back of the room. He saw Clara standing there in her extravagant, unpaid-for dress, her face contorted in a mask of absolute, paralyzing horror. Arthur whispered something to his new bride, who smiled and nodded, turning to greet the front row of guests. Arthur then walked down the aisle, his pace unhurried, his posture relaxed. The crowd parted for him. He stopped 2 feet away from Clara. The scent of her heavy perfume clashed with the fresh orchids. Clara's voice was a choked, trembling whisper. She demanded to know what this was, why he was doing this, how he could be so monstrous. Her father stepped forward, his face flushed with anger, but a single chilling look from Arthur rooted the older man to the floor. Arthur leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, conversational timbre meant only for her ears. He told her that he had not felt a single ounce of love for her since the moment she walked out that door. He explained that the woman he married today was his partner in every sense. The woman who had helped him build his empire, while Clara was busy being a battered punchline to a criminal's joke. He looked at her tears, the genuine soul-crushing despair welling in her eyes, and he felt the last remaining knot of tension in his chest dissolve into nothingness. He told her that every late night, every brutal negotiation, every dollar he earned was engineered for this exact moment. He hadn't built a life to share with her, he had built a monument to her monumental stupidity. He waited 3 years, he said, just to watch her beg, and now the show was over. He gestured vaguely toward the exit, suggesting she leave before security escorted her out, noting mildly that her dress looked incredibly cheap in this lighting. Then, without a second glance, Arthur turned his back on her, walking back down the aisle toward his actual future, leaving Clara to collapse into the arms of her humiliated parents, a discarded relic in a world that had entirely outgrown her. Revenge is often painted as a poison that destroys the vessel carrying it. But sometimes, when channeled with absolute discipline, it is the fire that forges iron into steel. Betrayal is a debt that the universe eventually collects, often with devastating interest. Loyalty is the only currency that retains its value in the dark, and those who trade it for cheap, fleeting illusions will inevitably find themselves bankrupt. If you believe that true loyalty is the ultimate foundation of any relationship, and that karma never misses its mark, drop a like on this video. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone get exactly what they deserved? Tell us your story.